Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's GreatSoft Company Secretarial webinar. I hope you're all doing well in these crazy times. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, so today we will obviously be going through the Company Secretarial product presented by GreatSoft. Just before we do so, just a couple of housekeeping rules or pointers. We will be recording this webinar, so you will be able to view this after the time. We'll be posting it to our YouTube channel, so please feel free to go and find it there if you ever need to refer back to anything that we've touched on today. And then also, you will notice we've obviously got a Q&A section. Please feel free to post any questions there that you might have as we go along through the session. Ian will be in the Q&A room, and he'll be able to answer as many questions as possible for you. If there are any questions that he can't answer that might relate more towards the company secretarial technical side of things rather than the use of GreatSoft, I will answer those questions either at the end of the webinar, depending on the timing. Otherwise, I will contact you individually to get back to you. But also, users, you're all welcome to obviously comment on anybody else's questions within the chat room. And then, yeah, at the end of the webinar, we will have a survey as well. So if you can please just answer those questions. I think there's only just 5 questions that will obviously help us to improve the product for you. Right, our agenda today, I'll just go through a brief introduction. We'll touch on the Roleplayer function, the compliance checklists, which I know is always a bit of a grain of contention or a lot of red tape and so on. The group organogram report, the CDM integration, custom workflow, and then also I'll just give you a bit of a taste of what's coming in the update that's being released at the end of next week. Just in terms of an introduction, my name is Anita Wahl. I'm sure I've met probably most of you by now, having started at GreatSoft in January 2016, so just over 5 years ago. I was actually a user of GreatSoft myself before moving over to GreatSoft to come become the product manager. I'm a qualified chartered secretary myself. I won't say how many years ago I did qualify, but it has been some time. And yeah, I've worked in the industry at various auditing firms of varying sizes and also in-house company secretarial as well for a very large international advertising and marketing group. So quite a bit of experience there, kind of giving away my age there by saying how many years of experience. But yeah, just one thing as well to add. I have been told many times that I speak very fast, especially in items like a webinar. So I will try my best to speak a bit slowly so that I can convey the message a bit better. But yeah, so hopefully we will be able to finish this within an hour and not 20 minutes if I speak too fast. Right, moving on to our first item. The Roleplayer function is an item or a functionality that we added in November last year. We had a request for this kind of functionality quite a lot of times and from a lot of clients, basically. Certainly, I know when I was using the system as well, you often, obviously, as as company secretarial practitioners, you create the registers on GreatSoft. And in order to do so, if you have to appoint a director, for example, or allot shares to a shareholder or a member, perhaps in a CC, any kind of linking within that register, you always have to go and create those entities first within client inquiry in order to be able to link them in the registers. But obviously, as the name suggests, that is your client database, or obviously if you're a corporate client of ours, that would be your group entities or your group entities essentially. So, to be able to add these kind of entities, or whether it's an individual or a company, perhaps as a shareholder, they're not necessarily part of your group or one of your clients. And therefore, we often had complaints from clients saying, these entities keep coming up in client lists and client reports when they're not actually clients. And I know partners are specifically within auditing firms. They often used to complain, they don't know who these people are and they're sitting there as their clients, but they're not really clients. So that's where the Roleplayer function becomes quite vital. Any of those entities that are being added to GreatSoft purely to be linked into a company secretarial register can be marked as role players. So therefore, they do not come up in any client lists. They won't come up in any reports, unless, of course, you go and select in the filters to include role players. So that's just quite an important part to bear in mind. Because of the fact that role players are not clients, you'll notice that these entities cannot be marked for any other client services in client inquiry at the same time. We actually, for that purpose, you'll notice if a client is marked as a role player, all the other client services will be disabled, and you will not be able to flag them for role players or for anything. So it was already a role player, it won't be able to be flagged for any other services. And the boxes will actually be grayed out, so they're not active. If you wanted to unflag them as role players and rather mark them for any other services, you'd have to first unflag the role player checkbox and flag the relevant services then, because they will then become active, and vice versa. So if you have, for example, a client that might be marked for tax or for secretarial or for office costing, for example, you would have to first unflag any other services before you will be able to flag them as a role player in client inquiry. Right. And then just to kind of give you a bit of an overview of that, within client inquiry, we obviously by default, they will not come up in your list of clients because obviously that's the objective of the functionality. But in the filters, you can obviously then include, you can select to include them in your list of entities that come up. We did also actually in January this year, we introduced a new setting within the profile. So you can actually choose if you want to have them included by default or excluded. So just to kind of give you just to show you how that works. So if you logged into GreatSoft, you can obviously come here into your profile settings. And you'll see that there is some functionality here. So not only for role player, but obviously you can also then choose if you want to show any of these other types of clients by default or not. So here you'll see on the demo site that I'm using, this is actually flagged yes. So that means that whenever I run a list of entities or I do a search in client inquiry, it will always bring up the role player entities as well. I know we've had quite a few clients sort of querying or not being able to find entities since this was introduced because of the fact that something was flagged as a role player and it was being hidden by default. So we've just brought these forward from the filters tab to the front section here. So you will easily be able to see which entities are role players and which ones aren't. Just to show you as well how easy it is to go and flag something or unflag something for these services. I'll just show you in this client. So, oh, it's a little bit lower down. But basically you can see here, this one is obviously flagged for office costing. So you'll see I cannot actually flag it now for role player services. If I want to flag this for role player, I'd have to first unflag for office costing, and then I can then select the role player option. But we won't be doing that now. We'll leave it as is. Right. And then switching back to our slides. You'll notice also, obviously, with the same intention or the same sort of approach, within the register dashboard, we still have the filters over here where you can actually choose whether you want to include or exclude the non-sec clients. Now, non-sec would obviously be your role player, but it could also be any other entities that are maybe flagged for office costing or tax, but not flagged for secretarial. So it's just very important to remember that this option is there. So if, for example, you're searching for a particular register and you can't find it, maybe just double check in filters to make sure that it isn't perhaps flagged for any other service, including the role player. And the same obviously then applies for the public interest score calculator. If you want to, if you would like to create or calculate a public interest score for a role player entity or any other, perhaps a tax client, for example, you just need to make sure that you flag that relevant box in the filter section. Related to the public interest score, we obviously have the public interest score listing report. You'll notice that in all the reports, specifically for secretarial, such as the public interest score listing report, we have included a checkbox where you can include or exclude role players. By default, they will exclude these because of the fact that they aren't clients. But if you would like to do public interest scores or view public interest scores that have been calculated in your report for any other clients that perhaps might, like I say, it could be role players or tax clients or even office costing, you would just need to make sure that the role player filter is changed to include those. Okay, moving forward. Annual returns dashboard. Obviously, again, this is a very important one to just be conscious of when you are submitting your annual returns or prepping for a month's annual returns that are due. Just make sure if you have any clients that might be role players, or perhaps you file annual returns, for example, for any clients that aren't necessarily secretarial clients. They might perhaps just be tax clients, and then you submit the annual returns for them. You would need to make sure that you go into the filters and flag that include non-sec clients checkbox. Otherwise, they will not come up in your lists for a particular month or whatever selection you've made. The same applies in the CIPC compliance checklist dashboard. This one actually, I think in the compliance checklist dashboard, it is flagged by default. So it will include your role players, but always best just to check that when you are running a list for a particular month or selection. And then again, these apply for the relevant reports as well. So your annual duties listing report, it will exclude your role players by default. But again, you can actually go and change that for the setting in the report when you run that report. And the same for the CIPC compliance checklist report. So just always be conscious of that when you are running any reports or searching for particular entities within your annual returns or your compliance checklists. And speaking of compliance checklist, that leads us to our next item. I think this has become quite a tedious task for a lot of secretarial practitioners out there. This was the introduction of the requirement to submit a compliance checklist that CIPC brought in, effectively in January last year. This obviously only applies to South African companies, not to Namibian ones. But yeah, it's just an extra administrative burden really on the secretarial users. So we've obviously, with that in mind, we are trying to make sure we try and help you as much as we can on GreatSoft to be able to record them, to monitor them, to track any submissions and so on. It's only the companies where they've had their annual financial statements audited or independently reviewed where they need to submit the checklist, and that has to be done within 30 business days of the anniversary of the company's date of incorporation. Therefore, it's in line with the same requirements or due date really of the annual return. But unlike when it was originally introduced, they've now actually made it a standalone service, so it's not necessarily hard-coded it's not going to hard stop your annual return submissions anymore. So they can be filed separately, but obviously, it is roughly about the same time that you would need to submit both of them. Just to reiterate as well what CIPC have said in the past, if you do submit any incorrect information in your checklists, you would need to obviously contact them using that email address that I've mentioned there, just to explain to them what information was incorrect and why it was incorrect. And it is then up to them whether they actually go and change that information or update it using obviously their own discretion. I believe it is quite a tedious process and quite a lengthy process, although I haven't had the experience myself of having to do that. Then just to carry on in terms of how the compliance checklists are actually recorded on GreatSoft, we have the compliance checklist dashboard. We had originally incorporated it within the annual returns because I know that was CIPC's original intention. But when they decided to actually have it as a standalone service, we then also brought it out of the annual return records, and they now have their own compliance checklist dashboard within the secretarial module. So you can then record them or track them separately to the annual returns, and they have their own listing report as well. So you'll notice, obviously, I'm sure some of you, if not quite a lot of you, have already started using the checklist records on GreatSoft. But if you do use the public interest goal calculator on GreatSoft, you will notice that the two are actually linked to each other. Because of the fact that the public interest score calculator obviously then will determine whether the company's financial statements have been audited or independently reviewed, that is, of course, very, very critical in terms of whether the compliance checklist is required or not of that company. So we've therefore linked the two of them together. You'll notice then if the public interest score has been calculated on GreatSoft, say, for example, in this case that I've got over here in this screenshot, this one obviously had a result of an independent review that was required for the financial statements, which means that this company would have to actually go ahead and submit a compliance checklist. When you would first open up that record, you'll notice that that independent review flag has already been ticked for you. So you don't have to go and change that. And you wouldn't have to go and check to see how were the financials prepared and so on. Just to also then show this to you in practice, I'll just go ahead to let me first show you on our public interest score calculator over here. I'm going to pull up a company called CDM. So you'll see this one has been calculated and it's showing as an independent review. So if I go and open up this company's compliance checklist record, it should automatically flag the independent review option for me. So I'm going to select it again over here. You can see it hasn't been started yet. So I'm going to go and open that record. And independent review, has already been selected for me. So that already has saved me quite a bit of time of having to figure out or find out from the various audit departments or whatever as to how those financial statements were prepared. Within this record, you can then obviously, as with the annual returns, you can complete as many or as few of these fields as you find relevant for your purposes. But obviously, the most important part really would be your checklist themselves. So you can go and answer each of these questions as necessary. You can add comments to them as well as you would on the CIPC's website. And once this has all been done, or you can even do it when even if you've got no answers selected, you can always export that checklist to a Word document. Or sorry, we've actually changed it now to an RDL report. And that can then obviously be sent to the relevant directors of the company for review or for answering and for signature at the bottom as well. I'll touch on the CDM side of things shortly, but just for now, the main thing is really that you can actually export the report as well. Like I say, you don't have to answer any questions, or you can perhaps just answer a couple, or you could answer all of them. But no matter how much of these questions have been answered, you can export that into a document that can then be shared with the directors. Right, and then moving back to our slides. Sorry. Yeah, also just to touch on the financial statement treatment section. Obviously, if you go and change the selection there to compilation, or if it's flagged as compilation, for example, you'll notice that the checklist status is changed then to not required, because obviously in the case of a compilation, they are then exempt from having to submit the compliance checklist. And in such a case, if that status is changed to not required, you'll notice that the date field over here would change from compliance checklist submitted date to the CIPC notification date. So you can therefore record the fact, or the date rather, when you notified CIPC that this company was exempt because of the fact that its financials were not audited or independently reviewed. That will then also filter through to the relevant compliance checklist listing report as well. So you can easily keep track of which ones have been submitted and which ones have not needed to be, but at least CIPC has been notified of that. Right, moving on to our next item, the group organogram. I hope most of you have noticed this report. If not, then I look forward to sharing this with you today. It's one of our most popular reports, I would reckon, for those that do use it. It's quite a comprehensive, because I know from my own experience as well, when you have to sit and try and put together a group organogram, it can be very time consuming. If you're sitting there using Excel spreadsheets, or I know some of them, there are some other Microsoft products as well, perhaps PowerPoint even, it can be very time consuming, because you have to not only try and draw it all together online, but you also have to obviously try and figure out what is the shareholding and how should it all be structured. Whereas on GreatSoft, we have this functionality for you. Because of the fact that the organogram is based purely on the shareholding that's been recorded on the database, what we do is we have the option where you literally can go into the reporting options and select the group organogram either upwards to be able to see all of your shareholders all the way up to the ultimate owners, or you can pull the group organogram downwards, which will then show you all the way, all the subsidiaries, either direct subsidiaries or indirect subsidiaries, literally at the click of a button. So it definitely saves a lot of time and a lot of patience as well. You'll be able to view the report on screen at any time. So you can, especially if it's a very big one, you can sort of drag and drop it around the screen. But if you want to export that report to either a PDF or a picture to be able to then, share with anybody else, you would need to actually have a license activated for that. So if you are interested in that, please do get in touch with your account manager, and they will be able to arrange the necessary for you. With each update that we also release, we try to add to this group organogram and enhance it even further, perhaps by adding filters or additional functionality within the report itself. You'll see also, we'll touch just now when, the last item obviously of today's agenda is what's coming in the next update. And there is actually an item there that relates to the group organogram, which I'll show you shortly. In the meantime, I'll just show you how the report can be accessed. Within the company registers, you'll notice that's where you've got the option to either see the organogram upwards or downwards. So you simply have to open up the company register, click on your reporting menu, and then select the relevant organogram report that you would like to view. As I mentioned, it would be viewed on screen at any time. I will actually just show you one if we go into the register section. So I'm going to choose this company. And you'll notice over here, I think this one has actually got quite a large organogram. So you will be able to drag and, this one isn't actually too bad. But if you did have a particularly large group organogram, you'd be able to, if you just click and hold down, you can actually drag the report across the screen to be able to view it, on either side. You can also zoom in or out as necessary. Then you also obviously have a number of filters that you can apply to the group organogram. So if, for example, you wanted to only see a minimum amount of shareholding, so for example, you maybe only want to see majority shareholders, you could put in your minimum shareholding perhaps as either 50.1 or just 51%, for example. Or perhaps you want to only see minority shareholders, perhaps with a view to buying them out. You could then put in a maximum perhaps of 49%, for example, or even 50%. And you can also choose if you want to have any decimals showing in your percentages over there. I'm going to say here null. And then you can also further filter by office, group, or partner if you only want to see a particular structure relating to any one of those different groups, basically. And then you simply have to click on apply and close, and you'll see all my little decimals have been taken away now. We also added some time ago, we added this option here where you can select to show a certification. So if, for example, you need to print this off and submit it as part of a tender or just some other government body, or perhaps you want to have it as part of your financials, for example, you can simply click and apply, and you'll see it will actually give you the chance to certify this as being accurate, either by a director or the company secretary can sign that off, basically. And that will then also display when you do export this to either PDF or picture. Right, and then I'm going to show you as well, if you wanted to then go and see the group organogram downwards, this will show any direct subsidiaries of the company, as well as any indirect subsidiaries. So you can see here, for example, it has this one direct subsidiary, and below that quite a number of indirect subsidiaries that are all displayed differently. You'll see also this, I know this can look quite confusing when you first look at it, because it looks like the same entity is basically showing twice, but you'll notice it's different share classes. So we have those share classes displayed separately, just to make it a bit easier to understand what the share structure is. Right, then let's move back to our slides. Okay. Then also, as I mentioned, obviously you can have the filters as you would need to require, or as you would require them to be applied. Just simply click on apply and close, and then it will display them for you. Then also what we did recently was we went ahead, because when we originally launched this report, it was only available within the company registers because of the fact that it's based purely on shareholding. So obviously, if you think about it, closed corporations, non-profit companies, and trusts, they don't have any shareholding recorded on the system. So therefore, the upwards organogram would never be applicable for them. But we subsequently went and launched the downwards organogram, and with that in mind, we then went and also added this report option to the registered types for closed corporations, non-profit companies, and trusts. So if they hold any subsidiaries, for example, you will then be able to also access the downwards organogram. I'll just show that to you quickly on one of these trusts. I'm going to say Dave. And we're going to select the downwards organogram here. And there you can see this one actually holds quite a few subsidiaries. It's quite a busy trust, this one. And that's quite simple, really. But yeah, like I say, if you do want to go ahead and use the functionality to be able to export this to PDF or picture, to be able to perhaps share with other people, or print and have them captured in terms of, I don't know, maybe tender documents or any other legal documents that you would require, then you can obviously just contact your account manager at any time and they will provide a quote to you. Moving on to our next item, CDM integration. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of our CDM products, and probably quite a few of you have already got this enabled. It is a separate product to the company secretarial and essentially the CRM section, which we call GreatSoft. It's a document management product, which is much more advanced than the very basic document upload functionality that we have on GreatSoft. So it's POPI compliant, it has a client portal, it's got its own login credentials and so on. So it's very secure from that perspective. It also makes things a lot easier and more secure. If you need to share documents either with clients in the case of perhaps an auditing firm, or if you're using GreatSoft as a corporate body, you can share those documents with your colleagues and directors and so on as necessary. but at least it's all done securely. You're not emailing those documents, because I think a lot of people have had many glitches in the past where documents have either been hacked or emails have been hacked or get sent to the wrong person, for example, and it could be confidential information on those documents. So the CDM product is a lot safer in that sense. So like I said, it is POPI compliant. And I know POPI is obviously becoming a bit more of a hot topic at the moment, with it becoming fully applicable from July this year. So yeah, I would definitely recommend, if you're not using CDM, then it is definitely worthwhile investigating the possibility of implementing this. As I mentioned, it is a standalone product. It's linked to our CRM system or Secretarial. So you would need to just get in touch with your account manager, perhaps for a full demonstration. I'm only going to touch on the Secretarial integration today. But if you would like to see more as to how it integrates with the rest of GreatSoft and how it would work and what the cost involved would be, please do get in touch with your account manager for that as well. Another benefit, especially for Secretarial clients, if you think about it, is the documents that are shared in CDM, not only are they securely shared, but they can also be signed electronically. So for example, if you need to share documents, perhaps resolutions or minutes or forms with any directors of companies or members of CCs or whatever the case might be, you can do so on CDM, and they will also be able to then sign those documents electronically for you. And you'll also be able to, they will be able to also share documents. So they will be able to upload to CDM, and you will be notified that they have shared certain documents with you. So again, it's all securely done and no emails are involved in terms of the actual documents being attached in the email. You simply get an email to say that the documents are available for viewing or sharing. Yeah, the CDM module as well, like I mentioned, is fully integrated with the whole of GreatSoft, but just in terms of the secretarial aspects today, you'll notice if CDM is enabled, you'll notice that within the registers, you'll find the CDM button. By clicking on that button for this particular register, that will open up CDM, and you'll be able to view any documents that have been uploaded onto CDM for that particular company or entity, I should say. It's not only companies. So that you'll be able to see the tax records, SEC records, any debtors records, for example. You can set up different security rights. You can set up different folder types. You know, the setup is entirely customizable for you, for your practice. But yeah, you'll be able to notice and see also if a client has, for example, like I mentioned, they can also upload documents. So you'll be able to see if they've sent any documents or shared any with you on the CDM module by clicking on that CDM button within the registers themselves. Once you log in over here as well, you'll be able to see which documents, I'll show you shortly, but you'll be able to see which ones have simply been saved to CDM and which ones have actually been published, meaning that a notification has been sent out to the client contact that has been set up on the system for that particular entity. So you'll be able to also then manage it from here as well. So if you can see something has been saved to CDM, but not yet notified to the client, you can then come in here and select which ones you would like to publish so that they are notified that there's something there for them to go and view or sign perhaps. I'll show this to you also now on the system. So if we come into here, if you see on the main dashboard as well, you'll see if CDM is enabled, there will be an icon over here which will take you to the main part of CDM, not necessarily just for the particular register as you would, as you saw now in that screenshot I just showed. But you can either access it through here to see all entities within your database on CDM, but I will be going into a particular register just to show you the secretarial integration part. So let's start. We go into this particular company. You'll notice here's our little CDM button. So if I click on that now, it's again not maximized. Oh, sorry. Let me go and maximize that. So here you can see, this is obviously just the demo side. So that's why there's a sec and a secretarial folder. But we'll only be looking at the secretarial one for now. But yeah, over here, like I mentioned, you can see on this particular company, on the demo side, we've already uploaded the annual return letters. So these have not yet been published. I can see that the boxes haven't been ticked yet, which means that they've simply been saved to CDM. So I can still come in here and make changes to the document, the Word one, obviously not the PDF. And I can then choose also when I want to share that with the client by simply clicking on the publish button. The workflow That will show any workflow documents that have previously been shared or saved on CDM as necessary for this particular company. If I now go and show you as well, I'm just going to first come back in here. The annual return letters, I'm sure you all have your own personal template set up on GreatSoft already for your annual return letters. But if I, for example, come in here and select July, I have already started each of these 3 companies that are due in July. You can see the half star, which means they haven't yet been submitted. They might have just have been opened and had the turnover figures saved, for example. If I use the global letters function, it will obviously let me capture my own template or select the template that I want to use for the global letters. And then also you'll notice it has a publish in CDM button. So if I select that, it then allows me to choose if I only want to submit them or save them within CDM, or if I'm happy with the letters without even viewing them first, it will allow me then to publish and notify them in CDM. So that means it'll save them to CDM and an email will be sent to the client to tell them that there's something there for them to view. And they can then see that they have an annual return due for one of their companies. I won't save that just yet, but if that was the option that I had selected, that is when you would see the letters that are showing over here. So this is where they are saved. It's that simple, really. Then in terms of the workflow, you'll notice, I'm just going to click here. If CDM is enabled, we will have extra buttons over here within the workflow items. So here you can see I've got my save to CDM option, and I've also got the publish to CDM option. As I mentioned, that will then also notify the client or the contact that's linked to this particular company that there are documents there for them to view and perhaps sign. So if I were to save to CDM, that's when the workflow would actually be saved over here. And again, as I mentioned, you can then from here, you can go ahead and manage them and monitor them as necessary. You can see these ones go back quite a few months already. And you can then also, once, if for example, there's some letters on here, I see it's just jumped to the annual returns one. If, for example, you decide that the documents are no longer relevant, or they might have been signed off, for example, and the transaction is complete, you can also archive these older documents if you need to, just to kind of, make the list a bit shorter and clean it up a little bit. Right, and then just closing that, I'm going to close the company register. The same really then applies with the CIPC compliance checklists. So if I, for example, were to come in here and say 25 Link Road, if CDM is enabled, you'll notice in the compliance checklist record that we also have the functionality here to be able to save and publish to CDM if it is enabled. So as I mentioned earlier, if you wanted to prepare this as a report that you now want to send to the directors of the company, either for them to answer or to confirm and to sign it off, you can then obviously export the report by clicking on that button. Alternatively, you can simply click on the save to CDM or publish to CDM to be able to then share that with them securely instead of sending it to them via email. And that will then also save to the relevant records over here. It will create a separate folder for you under the Secretarial, which is just your compliance checklist folder. And that's how the CDM integration works. You'll notice also, if you think of the info sheet, for example, I know that's a very popular report within the records. I'm just going to show you over here, because if I go back to the slides, the info sheet report and any other register reports can also be submitted or shared, via CDM. You'll notice, for example, along the left-hand side where all the filters are, there is an option over there to save to CDM. So if you simply select the relevant filters that you want to apply to the report, click on Save to CDM and then Show Report. That will then automatically save that info sheet report to CDM. From there, you can then obviously publish it as you would like to. It will be a PDF, so it can't be edited, but at least you could then perhaps share that with your client or your directors, for example, and they can view what the current status is of this company, or CC, as the case might be. Then moving forward, within the workflow, I mentioned obviously, I showed you now where you can also then save to CDM or publish to CDM. That would then obviously securely send all those documents through to your CDM portal for this particular company. You can then, if you just save to CDM, for example, you could then choose which of these documents you maybe wanted to share with the client or the directors. It might be that you only want to send some of them to them. So you can then choose from CDM as to which documents are then published and shared with your contacts on CDM. And then moving forward, the annual return letters I've shown you also in practice. You would then use your own letter templates. And then obviously if you select the month that you're looking to do, you click on your global letters utility, and you can then also choose to send all those letters straight to CDM, sorry. And if you really want to, you could also then publish and notify in CDM. Also the compliance checklist, as I showed you, you can also, save to CDM, publish to CDM as necessary. And yeah, you'll notice also, I'm just going to show you briefly within the registers before I move on to the next agenda item. If I come back to AW training, for example, these register reports that you have available in here, I did show you the info sheet report, but any of these other reports are also currently able to be saved to CDM. So if, for example, your directors might want to see the register of allotments, you can then print that off and save to CDM the same as you would with the info sheet, for example. Right. Moving on. Next agenda item is custom workflow. I'm not sure if many of you have seen any sort of newsletters in the past, but a few months ago, we introduced the ability for you to be able to have custom workflow implemented. I know from my own personal experience before I joined GreatSoft, when I was still in practice, I know that every single firm out there seems to have their own templates that they would like to use for certain workflow documents. So for example, whether that's minutes of meetings or notice of meetings, or even the resignation letter perhaps of a director, there are so many different templates that each firm prefers to use based on their own personal style or preferences. Now, obviously, I think a lot of users that are using GreatSoft, they probably, some of them probably do use the templates that we have on the system, the standard documents, but some of them might only want to use their own template. So while they might process transactions on GreatSoft, they would then still have to go to their templates and manually go and tweak it for the relevant transaction in the company. So changing the entity's name serves, for example, or the registration number. Perhaps if you're appointing a director, you would need to go and capture all the director's information on the resolutions or the minutes, for example. And obviously with something like that, not only is it very time consuming, but you're obviously also then susceptible to human error. So you might have typos. I've seen many cases in the past where documents were rejected because they either didn't have the correct registration number on, or perhaps the name hadn't been changed at the top of the document purely because of human error. And it happens. At the end of the day, we're all human. So in order to cut out or to mitigate that risk of human error, and also obviously for time-saving purposes, you can implement those custom templates of yours within the system. That means that they will be generated on GreatSoft automatically for you. So GreatSoft will then automatically, if you, like I mentioned, an appointment of director, for example, if you went ahead and processed that on GreatSoft within the registers, you would have all of your standard system documents that, that would be generated as normal. But then within the custom document section over here, you will then see the template that has actually been captured for you, which will be your own template. And what GreatSoft will then do is it takes your template, but it will populate it with the relevant data as necessary. So it will show the correct company name or the registration number, and whichever, like in this case, obviously it's an appointment of a director, it will pull through that individual's name. Anything else that you've got in the document that is sitting in the system will automatically be captured and populated for you. So that then immediately eliminates a lot of time, and it also mitigates the risk of human error. Obviously, human error humans still have to capture that data on the system. So if that has been captured incorrectly, it will pull through incorrectly. But at least it will mitigate that risk quite significantly. If you do want to follow this process, it's something that a consultant from GreatSoft would have to implement for you, just initially in terms of setting up the templates in the first place, and then new templates, because of the fact that the code behind those templates is quite complex. Even for myself, who's not a techie person, I'm a company secretary at heart. I've seen what goes into this, and it can be quite complex. So it has to be a consultant that can set it up for you initially. But there's nothing stopping you from, once those initial custom templates have been uploaded, there's nothing stopping you as the user going in and making certain changes to those templates. As long as the name stays the same, essentially, a consultant will show you how you can do it going forward, but you could make small changes yourself. So if you wanted to change the wording, for example, or the font type, or anything like that, those kind of changes can be done by you as the user. You won't have to keep contacting GreatSoft every time you wanted to make a change. Unless obviously you wanted to create a completely new template, then you would need to consult GreatSoft. So if you are interested in something like this, I would say definitely get in touch with your account manager. They will then be able to discuss the exercise with you and what costs would be involved, because it obviously would be consultant time that would be chargeable. But I think it would definitely be worthwhile for a lot of people. And then, yeah, moving forward, the exciting part, what's coming up in the next update. We have a new update coming out that will be released next week, Friday. That's the scheduled date. And in this new update that we have going out, we have this very exciting feature, which I wanted to just touch on with you guys today. We are going to be implementing an option within the company registers. Well, it will only be for South Africa, obviously, because it's related to CIPC. I don't think BEPA has this information available just yet for Namibian entities, but certainly something we would look at in the future. But yeah, for South African companies and close corporations, you'll notice what we're going to be doing in the next update is there'll be a new button that's added within the register that will say, compare and import data from CIPC. So what will happen is if you click on that button, this is a kind of an artist's impression, for lack of a better description, but this is kind of what it will look like when you click on that button. This utility will open up, and you'll notice on the left-hand side, it will display all the information that's currently in the register on GreatSoft. And on the right-hand side, we will display the information that's currently registered at CIPC. You will then be able to compare the two. And obviously, if there have been any changes or if there's any discrepancy between the left and the right-hand side, you will then be able to just click the button to say update from CIPC, basically. There could well be a case, I know it's happened many times in the past, where the data, there could be typos either on GreatSoft side or at CIPC side. I know it's happened a lot at CIPC side, where they actually have the typo, for example, in a director's name, for example. You can then obviously choose, it will flag up that there is a discrepancy between the data on GreatSoft and the data on CIPC, but you can then choose whether you go ahead and update that or not. It will then also prompt you just to capture a date registered so that we can make sure that we maintain that information on the system. But at least it will prevent you, or it will save quite a bit of time if there are any changes. So, for example, if it's a new register, the left-hand side will probably be blank. So you will be able to actually just import each one of those items straight from CIPC. If there is already data on the GreatSoft register, if it's an existing company, for example, there will obviously be information here on the left-hand side, and you will then be able to update any changes. So if there's any change of the registered office address, but you haven't yet captured it on GreatSoft, you would then be able to just click on the button on the right-hand side to be able to process that change. So that should also save quite a bit of time for users as well. This will just be a first step. We are also obviously we are in regular discussions with CIPC to be able to also send information to them. So, for example, if you wanted to appoint a director or submit an annual return, that you will then be able to submit that straight to CIPC from our system. But we are still in talks with them about that. Then also, just to give you a heads up as well, also in the same release next week or end of next week, in the group Organogram, I'm quite excited. We are actually going to be allowing users to be able to click on any of the entities within the organogram to be able to open up that entities register, if of course it exists. I'm just going to show you an example. I'm just going to open up. Obviously it's not a demo site yet because it hasn't actually been implemented yet. But as I mentioned, we have it as a test case. So I'll just give you an idea of how it's going to look. And while we're waiting for that, I'll just also explain the CDM integration. We've just enhanced that a little bit further. So as I showed you just now, at the moment, if you within a register and you want to pull any of your register reports, so for example, the register of allotments or the info sheet and so on, that integration already exists. However, the all registers report, the share certificates report, and the group organogram, those haven't yet been enabled to be able to save them straight to CDM. But that functionality is coming in next week's update. So I'm just going to show you over here. Okay, so if I choose it here. I'm just going to show you how the new organogram is going to work. Okay, so here you can see, for example, here's the trust. So if I click on the trust, it will automatically open up that trust register. So it saves me time of having to go back to the register screen and try and look for this entity. I can open it straight from here. Obviously, an individual isn't going to have a register, or it could be that you have an entity on here, as I mentioned, like a role player, for example. So you wouldn't necessarily have a register for them. So if you click on any entity like that, it will just show you that that register does not actually exist. But at least it will save a little bit of time if you do need to go into any of those different registers on the organogram. Then also we've added this option now, as I mentioned, to save to CDM. So you'll be able to save this organogram. Obviously, if you can first apply any filters as you need to, and then you can simply save it to CDM and then manage it from there as to whether you publish that and share it with clients or not. The all registers report, you'll notice that we've now also added a button to be able to save that to CDM. So you can select all the different reports that you'd like within one document, and then just click on Save to CDM to be able to share that with your directors or client as necessary. And then I'm just going to, is it going up again? And then lastly, the share certificates report. So I hope that you guys know about the share certificates report. This is if you want to, for example, print a bunch of share certificates in one document. Rather, you might have multiple shareholders and you need to go and print off all the different share certificates, for example. You wouldn't want to go into each and every one individually and go and print them. So this option allows you to capture or print, a bunch of multiple share certificates in one document. You can choose which layout you prefer to use as before, and then you can simply click on the ones that you'd like to print. Once you click on the print button, it will then open up that document, that report for you with the relevant filters on the left-hand side as normal with share certificates. And you can see over here what will happen from the update coming out next week. Once you've made all your relevant filter selections, you can then click on Save to CDM. And when you click on the Refresh Report, it will save that document for you in CDM, and you can share that straight from there with your directors or clients as necessary. Okay, I see it's not letting me close anything. It seems to be going off the screen a little bit. Right, then also moving further forward, in the annual duties listing reports for both South Africa and Namibia, we had quite a few, we obviously regularly get requests to add extra columns in those reports, just for any additional information. Obviously also, became relevant when the compliance checklist came out last year. It was all information that was needed the clients were finding should be showing on the reports. But, as would happen in practice, what necessarily, what one firm might want to see on the report is not necessarily what another firm would want to see. So we were showing everything to be able to cover all requirements. And that obviously was making the report very wide. So if you were then trying to export that report, I'd be impressed if anybody would manage to fit it into one page, basically, in terms of the width of the report, unless, of course, you went and manually edited it in Word or Excel. So what we've gone ahead and done is we've now managed to actually add a filter in the report, which will allow you to decide which of those columns you want to hide. So if there are any columns on the reports that you find you not necessarily, it's not relevant for you or you don't find useful, you can select to actually exclude them. As I mentioned, it's for both the South African report and the Namibian report. I'll just give you an indication of how it will work. And I think this is, I'm quite pleased that we were able to do this, because it was something that was becoming more and more of an issue, as I mentioned, each time we added new information to the report. So you'll notice here, the very first filter will be, which will allow you to basically select the different columns that you don't want to have displayed on the report. So if, for example, might be that you don't want to see the large AR flag and the, let's see, maybe the paid flag. And I'm going to actually flag also the partner, manager, and in charge and group. It'll make quite a big difference, I think, and also hide that. So I've hidden 7 columns on this one. So you'll notice that obviously that's going to be quite a chunk of information that's then hidden on the form. And if I then come in and say show report, just trying to maximize this. It should make it a lot narrower and a lot easier than to print that. So there you go. My report is far narrower now than it was before. As I mentioned, obviously it's not a set thing, so you're not going to, if you select it now, it's just going to demonstrate that, or it's going to apply that to the filter, to the report that you're running now. You would need to select that every time you run the report, but at least it makes it a lot easier now to be able to pull that report and display all the columns on one page that you find necessary and useful. Right, moving back to our slides. The last item, just a smaller one, the Register of Appointments report was always available in the company registers, but what we've gone ahead and done now is we've actually just gone and added those to the closed corporation and the non-profit company registers as well. So you'll now be able to pull those reports and be able to view, who the auditors are, past and present, secretary, and public officer, and that will be able to be used as you do at the moment in the company registers. And that's it really for our agenda. I'm not sure if there are any questions. I'm hoping that Ian has been able to help quite a few of you in the Q&A section. As I mentioned, obviously, if there are any questions that he couldn't answer, then I will definitely, I see he has actually answered all the questions. Thank you, Ian. But yeah, obviously, if there are any questions relating to today's webinar that relate to the company secretarial product, please do feel free to contact me. I'm sure you all have my email address from the webinar email that you received. Or obviously, as I mentioned, if it's relating to activating the group organogram or customized workflow, for example, please feel free to get in touch with your account manager. And yeah, if that's it, thank you very much, everybody. I know some of you are probably wanting to go off and go and attend a company secretarial or e-services training session with the CIPC. So hopefully we'll give you a little bit of a tea break before that starts. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll speak to you soon. Keep well. Thank you.